Hello everyone, it's me, Lego Marbles here. Now today, we're going to react to another ranking Nintendo stuff video because I didn't know that there was a fourth video about ranking stuff, but it's like, this video is about ranking 25 of the third-party Nintendo controllers, so I might as well react to it. But anyways, if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to like and subscribe and press that bell to be notified when a new video drops. And also, there will be a plush video coming soon, next week. So you all know, like, it's gonna come probably on Tuesday. But anyways, hope you all enjoy this video, and let's start this, shall we? In 3, 2, 1, and go.
We all know and love Nintendo's classic controllers, but what about those really weird third-party ones? I've gone ahead and picked out 25 of the strangest controllers you can use on Nintendo systems. This list is based off how useful the controller is and how many games it can be used with. So with that, let's get her ranked. 25, U-Force. Connect fans, get your virtual pitchforks out because I am not a fan of this controller. As I'm sure you know, you're supposed to play the game with your hand movements, which is read with infrared sensors. As cool as that might sound, it doesn't actually work. Like, at all. You're supposed to be able to control the D-pad, A, and the B buttons with your hands, while Start and Select have designated buttons on the bottom. There's also turbo buttons and game switches to change the controls, but even with the correct switches, it's incredibly unresponsive. Maybe the U-Force worked better back in the day, but you have zero sense of control with this thing. It also comes with a flight stick and a power bar for some games, but why even bother? 24, N64 LogiNet controller. This looks like your typical N64 controller, but it was used exclusively for hotels. There's also some new buttons on here, like order, menu, reset, select, and even some phone keys. These were used for services at the hotel and even controlling the TV to change channels. While this is a really unique piece of history, there's one problem with it. It's not usable anymore. The end of this has an RJ11 phone connector, which can't be used with a normal N64 unless you heavily modded the controller. There's actually a great video about this controller, which I highly recommend you check out from Nintendo after watching this. 23, SNES NTT datapad. You want to talk about an obscure piece of gaming history? You're looking at it now. The NTT datapad was used for one Japanese game called Drop Hat, and the game allowed you to gamble online for horse racing. This game only worked in Japan, and the service has ended now, which makes this controller a dud. That's right, you can't even use this for normal games. I tried it on my SNES, and, well, nothing happened. And it's too bad that it doesn't work because I actually really like the bigger size and the buttons. The grip is really comfortable and the buttons have a solid click to them. So again, it's too bad you can't use it normally. 22, Laser Scope. In case you didn't feel like using the zapper in Duck Hunt, the laser scope lets you yell "fire" into a microphone instead. You'll aim your target by using this scope, and as a bonus, you can plug the audio cable directly into the NES. And if you really wanted, these can also be used as actual headphones too. I really would love to meet the one guy that did this unironically. The huge problem here is most games don't work with a laser scope, and you'd need the proper TV to be able to use this at all. It's an interesting but mostly useless novelty. 21, N64 Power Glove. One look at this thing and carpal tunnel is knocking at your door. We'll get to the complexity of the NES Power Glove in a bit, but I'll give this one some props as there's not really any setup to use this. You just plug it in and strap your arms up. The buttons are all laid out across your fingers and the D-pad is positioned near your thumb. You may have noticed one button missing, the joystick. That is controlled by bending your wrist. The original idea is this is supposed to make FPS games easier to aim with. Well, supposed to in quotations. I had no idea what direction I was supposed to bend my wrist in, and hitting the buttons is extremely uncomfortable. When I try to push B as an example, I would always hit R by accident just because they're so close together. Now I did try this with GoldenEye, and well, maybe my glove is just broken or something, but it just didn't want to work. Like, I would move around and sometimes it would move with me and sometimes it didn't. 20, NES Power Glove. If there's one thing I can say, it looks a lot cooler than the N64 glove. Does it function any better though? Well, no and kind of yes. So this glove is different from the N64 one because its main purpose is to use only your fingers and thumbs to play. Right away, that sounds like a bad idea, and that's because it is. Before even playing, you have to set up these sensors, and there's no easy way to do that, especially if you have a big TV. I was forced to use an older regular TV to set this up, and I needed to use a load of duct tape just to keep the sensors up. Next, you have to put in a specific code for each game because they all work a little differently. And after all of that, shockingly, the glove actually kind of works. By flicking your fingers or thumbs, it triggers different inputs. But that doesn't matter, because none of the games are intuitive with this playstyle. So now you might think, well, you could just use the controller on the glove, right? Well, my answer to that? Not really, because the motions of the glove are always activated, so random inputs are going to get projected if you move the glove too much when pushing the buttons. This whole thing is just a big, beautiful mess that somehow technically works and just doesn't. 19. Roland Rocker. This is basically a DDR pad with one giant button. The idea behind this one is the rocker becomes the D-pad on your controller. By shifting your weight around, you'll be able to move around on screen. And believe it or not, this actually works. That isn't saying much though, considering how much more effort it takes to move compared to using your thumb. And what's funny is you need the NES controller plugged in to use the other buttons. So there's literally no reason to use this thing, unless you're with some friends and want to goof off and play games with this hunk of plastic. 18. Ultra Racer 64. The most impressive thing about this is they managed to cram all the N64 buttons into what's basically a glorified nunchuck. The main reason to own this is to improve racing games with this little wheel, and I do gotta say, it's surprisingly accurate and moves very fluidly. This felt on the outside helps a lot with gripping too. There's also a trigger on the back in which you push down for A and push up for B. All of this is fine, but there's not much of a way to move up and down, so you're really stuck with just racing games with this controller. And the D-pad buttons are way too tiny and barely usable. I mean, just look at this thing. It's just a big cluster of buttons. It's a Wii remote gone wrong. The Ultra Racer 64 is a neat idea and concept, but it's kind of unnecessary and doesn't really need to exist. 17. Miracle Piano. It certainly is a miracle that a full-fledged piano is compatible with the NES. This was a rather robust tool for learning how to play piano back in the day. Plus, the one game it works with has actual mini-games in it to make the learning more fun. The keys feel like your typical piano keys, and there's even options to change the volume and sounds. With all that said, it's really only good for one game, and the piano is pretty darn spendy. It originally retailed at $500. In 2019 with inflation, it would cost almost $1,000. 16. DDR Action Pad. It still trips me out that this was created for a Mario game. There's a lot of DDR pads out there, and this is one of the better ones. The material feels nice, it's fairly light and folds well, and the overall design looks pretty solid. The pad buttons are responsive too, as I had no issues with the controls or anything of that nature. While you can technically play other GameCube games with this, it doesn't have all the same inputs, so it's gonna be a little wonky or just straight up unplayable. It's really just for DDR Mario Mix, so that does limit its use, but it's perfect if you're craving that kind of game. 15. Quick Shot Trackball. Here's an NES controller that's supposed to be used for trackball games like Marble Madness. So you'd expect this giant ball to move in 360 degrees, but it's just a joypad. You can push it around in 8 directions, and that's it. The A and B buttons are kind of cool. They're fairly large and fun to click, but this trackball is just horrible. There's suction cups on the bottom to try to prevent the controller from moving, but I found they suction pretty poorly. The Quick Shot Trackball does work with every game, but there's so many better options out there. 14. Zoomer. Okay, so here we have a flight stick for the NES. The entire stick is the D-pad, and you can push and pull it to move up and down. The top of the stick has the A and B buttons, and you can also increase or decrease their sensitivity. And to my surprise, moving around with this was kind of comfortable and accurate, and the grips feel pretty good as well. Here's my question though, how many flight simulator games are there on the NES? Besides Top Gun, nothing else really comes to mind. The main issue is that this controller moves when you're trying to turn, which can be disorienting. There is suction cups to try to remedy that, but they just aren't strong enough. This seems like another silly controller that didn't need to be made, but at least it's something fun to bring out for parties. 13. Ultimate Super Stick. Was this compressed NES Advantage truly ultimate? Well, kind of. I do like the way this looks. It kind of reminds me of a spaceship in a way. At first, I was confused why there was A and B buttons on both sides until I realized that they're accommodating for right and left-hand players, which is pretty rare to see. The suction cups to keep this nailed down doesn't really work though. Although like I've been saying it's probably just the age of this controller. My only true gripe with this is unfortunately the most important part, the joystick. It's way stiffer than it needs to be. It doesn't feel that great to move around with. I think people love the NES Advantage because the joystick is really fluid, and this is the complete opposite. 12. Guitar Hero Wii Controller. This is by far the most nostalgic third-party controller for me. Over a decade ago, music games were the big craze, and Guitar Hero 3 came to Wii with this fancy
I've seen
guitar.
commercials
It has
and
5
videos
front
off of
buttons,
it.
a strum bar, a whammy stick, as well as a joystick and a couple of buttons. There's multiple versions of this guitar, and people tend to prefer the Guitar Hero 3 and Guitar Hero 5 variants. These are by far some of the most durable controllers out there. I've rarely had issues with them besides the whammy bar breaking over several years of use. The only true issue is that it's intent for Guitar Hero and Rock Band games only, and they don't really work for anything else. Despite its limited game selection, you could easily spend hundreds upon hundreds of hours playing and mastering all the songs out there. 11. GameCube Joy-Cons. One glance at these will catch anybody's attention. They may look like a Smash Bros. Player's dream controller, but unfortunately there's a barrage of issues. Firstly, the joysticks are the same ones as the regular Joy-Cons. And looking closer, you'll see that the analog gates are rotated incorrectly. But guess what? That doesn't even matter because the joysticks don't even reach the gates, which means they incorrectly added the gates and they're just for show. Next, we'll talk about the buttons. The clickiness feeling is fine, but the buttons themselves aren't tall enough. And for some reason, the rumble is way more powerful than it needs to be. Just listen to this. What the hell? Like, why is it so strong? Now, people love the pressure-sensitive shoulder buttons on the GameCube controller, but this doesn't have that at all. It's just basic buttons. I know I've criticized this controller a lot, so I will say that the D-pad is pretty decent, although not 100% responsive. And I do really like the ergonomics on the sides. They're definitely more comfortable to hold than the regular Joy-Cons. The addition of a charge port on the controllers is nice too, although they were put on the sides, which is a little weird, and they don't have a door to protect dust from getting in. And unlike most third-party controllers, it does have an NFC reader and motion controls. These GameCube Joy-Cons are an awesome idea. I just think they need to be tweaked and revised a bit. 10. Switch 8-Bit Do Lite. If you ever missed the Virtual Boy's double D-pads, then this might be for you. This has to be the weirdest new controller out there. The battery life is around 18 hours, which isn't too bad, but it's also missing motion controls, rumble, and the NFC reader, so it's pretty bare bones on features. On the flip side, this is third party, so it works with a Switch as well as other devices that utilize
Sorry
Bluetooth.
guys, but
and it's pretty cheap, sitting at
camera's almost
$25. This is meant primarily for 2D games only, and after trying things like Tetris 99, Celeste, and a few NES titles, the D-pads and buttons hold up really well. The controller is a bit on the small side, but my hands didn't really cramp
There
up
we go.
while playing. I will say though, the tiny ZL
We're
and
saved,
CR
guys.
buttons are in a horrible spot and might cause cramping from long periods of play. Another downside is the L3 and R3 buttons. You push down on the D-pads to activate them, but it doesn't really work well and it's super clunky feeling too. 9. Super Pad Plus 64. This is by
Wow.
far the most awkward controller I've ever seen. The right side feels fine to hold, but the left is too big. Like, why is the scaling so different? The joystick is
Just
better
adjusting
than
the
the
camera.
original, but that isn't much competition to beat, and it feels a bit slippery. The analog gates are rotated wrong as well, although that didn't really impact gameplay at all. The buttons feel really nice though, and the D-pad is pretty solid too. There's also a slow and auto button if you ever wanted to use those. I'm so conflicted on the Super Pad Plus 64 because it functions better than the original N64 one, but it also goes out of its way to be shaped so bizarrely for no good reason. 8. N64 Arcade Shark. Every console gets some sort of arcade controller. Here's the N64's. Now, the one that I have is honestly in really bad shape. The D-pad is almost torn out of place, and some of the buttons have stickers that say, "Winning is everything." It's not, but okay. Even though my controller has been heavily used, it still works pretty well. The buttons have a satisfying click to them, the joystick movement is very fluid, and there's also a slow and auto button. You can even hook up a rumble pack on the top, which is super weird, but pretty neat. The best feature of the Arcade Shark is that you can interchange the joystick by simply unscrewing it. If you're into fighting games and can find a well-kept-up Arcade Shark, this might actually be worth picking up. 7. RE4 chainsaw controller.
Wait,
you know
what?
you've got a good game when an entire controller is created for it. I technically have the PS2 one and not the GameCube one, but they're very similar outside of the plastic coloring and the button placement. While this looks like a mess, it's actually somewhat comfortable to play games with. The main face buttons are right on the front with the joysticks, and R1 and L1 are attached to both of the handles. The only bad button placement is R2 and L2 just because they're so far away from everything else. Here's something really cool about this controller though. It has 2 pause buttons. There's this one that's a normal button, and this is the second one. That's right. The pulley pauses the game with sound effects and lights. That is just awesome. 6.
Wow.
Turbo Touch 360. I gotta say, a touch-based D-pad for the NES sounded like a horrible concoction. But then I tried it out and holy crap, it's actually pretty darn amazing. Moving around is just as easy and simple as with a normal D-pad. Heck, I'd almost consider this better to use when trying to roll your thumb around. Now, the easiest comparison to this type of D-pad is using a touchscreen on a phone. Without haptic feedback, it's not gonna feel right or be accurate, but there kind of is feedback because of the plastic barrier on the outside, which helps set boundaries for your thumb. The only issue I found is that the buttons are a little sticky, but that's likely just from aging. 5. GameCube Mad Catz controller. This is by far the most popular third-party controller for the GameCube. It seems like everybody had one, but nobody ever wanted to use it. It's roughly the same size as the regular controller, but now there's these side grips. They seem a little unnecessary. I'm not getting a firmer grip or anything. The best way to sum up the Mad Catz is that it's the same thing, but with slightly cheaper build quality. The original is like eating Chick-fil-A, and the Mad Catz is McDonald's. The joystick feels kind of slippery, the start button's a bit mushy, and the face buttons don't have the most solid feeling clicks. I mean, the Mad Catz functions perfectly fine as an alternative. It's not really bad, but you might as well just use a regular controller. 4. GameCube ASCII keyboard controller. This isn't just a controller. You could wield this as a sword in battle if you wanted. So obviously, this hilariously large controller has a full keyboard built in. It has all the English keys, but also Japanese hiragana and Latin characters. While I don't have a way to test the functionality of the keyboard, I can already say that it's a little on the small side. My hands felt squished when typing. I mean, look how tiny the spacebar is. The buttons, though, feel pretty much the same as the normal controller, although I noticed the joystick is a bit looser feeling. That doesn't hinder me playing, though. Now, this was made for one game, Phantasy Star Online, and unfortunately, that's about it. So even though you can't really use the keyboard, I honestly really enjoyed using this as a standard controller. It's much lighter than you'd expect it to be, and it grips really well in your hands. 3. Vivan Cool Switch Pro controller. I know this looks like some weird PlayStation knockoff, but this is a surprisingly solid alternative to the regular Pro controller. My favorite thing about it is the grips. They feel downright mesmerizing. The build quality is really impressive too. I'm not sure how long the durability will last, but as of now, it works perfectly. The buttons feel great, including the shoulder ones, and it even has gyro controls and rumble added in. The PlayStation-inspired D-pad is surprisingly responsive. I was able to play platformers and Tetris at ease. In fact, I would say this is more accurate than the Pro controller's D-pad. I'm not joking. I also tried this with Splatoon, and believe it or not, I forgot I was using a third-party controller when playing. That's how much I enjoyed this. The only small downside is there's no capture button. And what's strange about that is this minus button seems like it would be used for capturing, but it just doesn't function half the time. And the charging port isn't USB-C either, but that's not that big a deal. 2. N64 Hori Pad Mini. It's
That's
pretty
a small
rare that
one.
a third-party controller so drastically improves over the original, but the Hori Pad Mini is one of those cases. The biggest upgrade is, of course, the joystick. It looks and feels exactly like the one from the GameCube. It's much better than that dinky nub from before. The Z button has also been improved as it's put on the left and right side next to the shoulder buttons. The start button feels better too. Heck, even the rumble pack more snugly fits in than the originals does, which is kind of crazy. The only negative thing here is the high price, and the D-pad is a touch too close to the A and B buttons. If you're playing a game that relies heavily on the D-pad, your thumbs might get in the way of each other. and one Colander Wii U Pro controller. While it's not the most interesting looking controller from this video, it's by far the most functional. The design is identical to the regular Wii U Pro controller outside of a few differences. When rotating the joysticks, they feel a smidge rougher and not as smooth. The buttons also feel a touch more mushy, but honestly, you don't even notice these differences when playing. Everything functions flawlessly. I actually prefer the sync button on the Colander because it pops out a little bit more, making it a bit easier to press, but it still won't get pushed accidentally. If you aren't interested in owning authentic controllers, I'd highly recommend getting this over Nintendo's because it's a little bit cheaper. Well, that was quite an experience.
Yeah, it was. My camera almost died.
Wonky, but it turns out they can, and it's really interesting to see what succeeded and what failed over time. But with that, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and thanks a bunch for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll speak with you all soon.
Okay guys, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Yes, my camera almost died while recording. I had to go off screen, and I'm sorry about that, but I was listening to the video still, so anyways, hopefully that doesn't distract you that much because I had to charge my camera and I forgot to, so I had to do that. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video anyways. Anyway, a new plush video is coming next week, so anyways, I'll see you all next time. Anyways, make sure to like and subscribe and press that bell to be notified when a new video drops and all that. Anyways, have a fantastic day and weekend because that's what it is. It's on a Saturday. Anyways, bye guys.